Well, as I mentioned off the top of the program, the Toronto Raptors took it upon themselves to make a decision on Nick Nurse. Nurse, near the end of the year, as you may know, about 2 weeks ago, mentioned that he wondered whether his time with the Toronto Raptors was coming to an end, whether he should be looking somewhere else. But all that was done. We knew he had 1 year left on his contract. And the way Nick was framing this was that it was going to be his decision ultimately as to whether to come back or not. Do you think, John, that maybe Nurse had an inkling that his position with the Raptors wasn't secure?
Absolutely. I'll tell you what, if you look back at the timeline, our pal Doug Smith came out with a story 3.5 weeks ago that suggested, that Nick Nurse's name has surfaced in Houston to be the head coach of the Rockets, and that if Nurse was to leave, Udoka, the former Boston coach, was going to be a candidate for the Raptor job. Unsolicited from anybody, but somehow that got into the Toronto Star. This was before that Friday night press conference in Philadelphia that Nick Nurse had when he was asked the question about what do you think is going to happen next year. And I truthfully believe that Nurse felt, well, hold on. How did this story that Doug Smith had, and God bless Doug Smith, how did this story leak out? Where did it come from? Was this, a censor being sent out about the future of Nick Nurse with the Raptors? So he felt an obligation to give his side when he was asked the question. So he's asked the question and he gives a very honest answer saying, you know what, I might take a step back. Right. I might, and he didn't do the classic coach speak and say, well, I'm only focused on the game against the Sixers. I'm only focused on getting this team to the playoffs. He was very thoughtful. He was very open. And I think that caught the Raptors off guard, Bob. I really do. I think that, and I think the next day Masai was on the phone saying, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And I think they probably had a pretty candid conversation about, well, I'm reading about Udoka coming to be my replacement. What's going on here? And I think that day, that cemented Nick Nurse was going to be dismissed as the coach of the Toronto Raptors.
You think the general manager had made that decision already?
I think the president of basketball operations, Masai Ujiri, yeah. I think he was leaning that way, and I think that was the tipping point. I think that put him over the top. And when you hear Masai talk in his press conference on Friday, that he says, the decision was made after the play-in game against the Bulls, where they were up 19 and then ended up losing. And he hated to lose, and it was a bad season. I don't blame him. You and I've talked about what's right with this team, what's wrong with this team. But I think by doing what he did to Nurse, he is putting all the blame for the failure of this team on Nick Nurse, and he's not taking any responsibility himself. Would
you have fired Nick Nurse? I gather you wouldn't.
I would not have. I think when you look, but you listen, I mean, what Ujiri and Bobby Webster probably did was listen to the player exit meetings and saying what's right with wrong with this team. What's the communication issue with the coach? Are we going in the right direction? And what happened was that in the end, and I do think that Masai had already decided, but the players probably reinforced that if Nick wasn't going to change, then Nick had to go.
I take it that one of the issues, I wouldn't say the only issue, but one of the issues with Nurse was the fact that he did not play his bench. He did not go very deep. He had a reluctance to play a bunch of players who weren't starters. Do you think that was an issue that the president was, opposed to?
It's only a guess, but I would suspect that what management, gives, a coach 15 players to use and expects them to be used at appropriate times in order to develop them. But Nick Nurse's job is to win.
Right, exactly.
And so now we have divergent mission statements. Where are we going? What are we doing? But again, Masai talked today about, the difficulty that Scotty Barnes had. Well, is that on Nick Nurse? Was that Nick Nurse's problem?
No, I don't think so. Scotty Barnes had plenty of opportunity. He had opportunity
Correct.
every night.
Correct.
And I think he was below average, to tell you the truth. I know you don't agree with me.
No,
and the
no,
basketball guys generally don't either, but
I think he was
Barnes
distracted.
Was a big disappointment.
I think Barnes was distracted all season long. I think he was distracted. I think that he had too much too soon. All the outside influences of the game. I mean, and you might think I'm silly, but this kid's 21 years old. He's being bombarded with everything, whether it being, and Masai talked about this in the press conference, saying he didn't even want to go to the NBA championship, the NBA finals, to pick up his Rookie of the Year trophy. Because he didn't understand that that's part of the obligation when you play in the National Basketball Association. But I look at all the attention he got off the court, all the commercials, all the pushing and pulling. And, heck, Bob, I watched 4 different commercials with Scotty Barnes in it, and he's 21 years old. That's got to go to your head. No, but that's got to go to your head at some point. That's got to tell you that you're bigger than the team.
Well, I don't know how he thinks that. I mean, nobody thought that Scotty Barnes was the best player on the Toronto Raptors.
Yeah.
In spite of what you may think of him individually. Look, Siakam and probably Van Vliet would come ahead of Barnes. He may be third, but then you got Anunoby.
Yeah.
And there are people who love Anunoby. So, he might be the 4th cog in the wheel. And for him to have 4 commercials on television running at the same time, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
I'd be very happy with that.
Well, you must be his agent then.
Well, no, but I mean, shouldn't you be?
Well, all I'm saying is, and I'm not talking about the actual commercials. I'm talking about the whole concept of distractions of why you are playing this game. Focus on your on court. Focus on your conditioning. Focus on the game. And that couldn't happen.
There are plenty of Scotty Barnes type players in the National Basketball Association in all sport. And the vast majority of them figure out how to do it better and get better
and quicker.
And he really did not.
Yeah. Yeah. So now Masai also touched on that there was going to have to be more changes. Where does that put a guy like Siakam?
Well, that I don't know. I don't know how it relates to Siakam more than any other player, but nonetheless.
Well, are you re-signing Van Vliet now? Are you picking up the option?
Look, if you're asking me what I think the Raptors will do, the answer is I have no idea. You have a new coach coming in. Are you not going to consult with him, or are you going to be Jesus and sitting above?
How much do you think they consulted with Nick?
I don't have any idea.
Yeah, I would. I'm not sure that, even though they claim to have a good relationship, and look, I think that this was a classic case. This is a classic case of management saying, "Here are the players, you play them, and I'm not going to tell you who to play, but you better win."
Maybe, but it seems to me that what I would do if I was the general manager of a pro sports team is I'd bring the coach in and I'd say, "What do you think of this?" I mean, I would consult with my head coach. It doesn't mean I'd take every answer from him, but I wouldn't be above him.
Tell you what, this is, remember the story of how Edward Rogers thought that Masai shouldn't get this contract because it was too much money, and the whole concept that Masai was putting himself above everybody, and the amount of money he was going to get was something that not the whole board agreed on.
Yeah,
Masai's put himself on the front line now. Masai has put himself on the front line.
But he did that. He did that through the whole year because he, for one reason, he chose not to talk on a regular basis. So he had no idea what he was thinking. No idea all year long what he thought of this roster or of how Nick Nurse was using it. Now, my guess is by firing Nurse, he believes he provided a roster that was better than 41 wins. He provided a better roster than Nick Nurse produced victories from.
Although he did admit that he didn't like the way the team played most of the season. which which kind of reflects what most fans thought and what you and I talked about as the season went on too.